Welcome to our Bible study for this week. As you know, we are working our way through the Gospel of Matthew, and we're taking a broad overview, doing it chapter by chapter. Now, this week we are reaching chapter 8. Now, I need to tell you that actually in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 8 and chapter 9 form a pair, 10 miraculous events that Jesus performed, and we'll deal with them separately, but we need to remember that in the original manuscripts, there were no chapter divisions, and it was just one section. Now, to start off with, I'm not going to read the whole chapter. What I chose to do is I'm going to read each section as we deal with it. Now, in chapter 8, there are 7 sections. So let me give you the outline, and then we'll deal with each section as we go through it. In verses 1 to 4, there is a man with a skin disease, and he is healed. Secondly, in verses 5 to 13, there is the account of the centurion's servant who is healed. Thirdly, in verses 14 to 17, there are the healings in Capernaum. Fourthly, verses 18 to 20, it was the scribe who wanted to follow Jesus. In verses 21 to 22, there is another person that wants to follow Jesus. Sixthly, in verses 23 to 27, we have the incident of Jesus calming the storm, where even the winds and waves obey him. And seventhly, in verses 28 to 34, there is the deliverance of the 2 demon-possessed men. In that, of course, there are 5 instances of Jesus demonstrating his power. That is the man with the skin disease, the centurion's servant, the miracles at Capernaum, the storm on the sea, and the demon-possessed man. And there are different categories of looking at these, and people have categorized them into various ways. But what we shall do is we shall just deal with them one by one as we go through the chapter. So first of all, let's read chapter 8 and verses 1 to 4. When he came down from the mountainside, large crowds followed him. A man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said. "Be clean." Immediately he was cured of his leprosy. Then Jesus said to him, "See that you don't tell anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer the gift Moses commanded as a testimony to them." Now, with today's medical knowledge, we know that leprosy, true leprosy as such, is a very specific disease. It slowly causes loss of sensation, particularly in the extremities, and it's because of that loss of sensation that people don't feel when they're hurting themselves, and it's through those injuries that people slowly have tissue damage, they have loss of flesh, and ultimately loss of hands, feet, fingers, toes, and other things. Very fortunately for us, leprosy today is a curable disease. However, in those times, it was much feared. But I also need to tell you that in those times, the word that is translated leprosy in our Bibles, it's the Greek word leprous, actually described a wide variety of skin complaints. And some skin complaints will naturally resolve themselves, and others will not, including leprosy, real leprosy. And so when we are told that this man had leprosy, we don't know actually which condition he had. However, within the Jewish community at that time, all such skin diseases were regarded as unclean, and therefore these people had to be separated from society, if you like, proper social distancing, where those who have a disease are separated from the healthy. Now, just to observe the main points in this, there is a lot that we could take out of it, and many sermons have been preached on it, but we're just taking the large overview. The first thing to notice is that Jesus could heal instantly with just a touch. And whilst this man should not have been touched, Jesus had the power, the authority to overcome and overrule the uncleanness of this disease. So it points not just to his power, but to his holiness and authority as well. The second part is, if you go back and read in Leviticus chapter 14, there Moses laid out, according to the command of the Lord, the requirements of those who had various skin diseases. And one of them was, when a person had been healed of a skin disease, his way back into society was to go and present himself to the priest. The priest would examine where the disease had been and proclaim if he had been healed. And so Jesus sent this man to the priests so that it was a testimony to them of the power of Jesus. No doubt when the man went to the priest and said, I want to be declared clean, the priest said, how did this happen? And he would have been able to give a testimony to the healing power of Jesus Christ. Very, very interesting passage. Very, very interesting account. We move on to the second event in Matthew chapter 8. And this is the healing of the centurion's servant. So let's read that. This is now verses 5 to 13. When Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him asking for help. Lord, he said, my servant lies at home paralyzed and in terrible suffering. Jesus said to him, I will go and heal him. The centurion replied, Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes, and that one, come, and he does, and he comes. And I say to my servant, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard this, he was astonished, and said to those following him, I tell you the truth. I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. I say to you, that many will come from the east and the west and will take their places at the feast with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the subjects of the kingdom will be thrown outside into the darkness, where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then Jesus said to the centurion, Go, it will be done just as you believed it would. And his servant was healed from that hour. We do not know the cause of the servant's paralysis. What we are told is, whatever the cause was, it also produced significant pain, excruciating pain and suffering. The parallel account in Luke chapter 7 tells us, in fact, that the servant was close to death, which is why there was the urgency of the centurion coming to Jesus. Now, again, there is a lot in this. We're not going to focus on the detail, but we're just going to observe some main points. The first is, as we've been going through Matthew, we've seen the beginnings of the unbelief and the subsequent opposition to Jesus from among the Jews. And we shall see more of it again at the end of this chapter. Here we have a Gentile, an outsider, considered equal to a dog, by the Jews. And he has this remarkable faith that Jesus so magnificently commends. We learn, secondly, that Jesus could heal at a distance without even seeing the afflicted person. You know, in the world of religious healing, there are many charlatans. There are many crooks. There are many people out to make a quick buck. And a number of documentaries and films have been made about this, and I would advise people to watch them and watch them carefully. We need to separate out true healings from false healings. There are the psychological healings, the way that people use various techniques to get people to forget or ignore their pain or discomfort or deal with psychological healings. But then again, there are genuine, true healings. And we must learn to be very careful, distinguish between the two, and acknowledge where true healings have taken place, particularly in the scriptures. Just one other point to observe here is that, first of all, although Jesus was well able to heal at a distance, he has some words of condemnation for those who did not have the same faith that this Gentile centurion had. And we find a mention of the kingdom of heaven here, how Abraham, Isaac, Jacob would be seated in the kingdom of heaven. It's the kind of little remark to make a note of. And if you do a study on the kingdom of heaven, we'll come across that in Matthew chapter 13, to remember this kind of information as we try and broaden our knowledge and understanding of the kingdom of heaven. Let's turn to our third section now, verses 14 to 17. When Jesus came into Peter's house, he saw Peter's mother-in-law lying in bed with a fever. He touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she got up and began to wait on them. When evening came, many who were demon-possessed were brought to him, and he drove out the spirits with a word and healed all the sick. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. He took up our infirmities and carried our diseases. First of all, note that Peter was married, and much to certain church organizations which refuse to allow their priests and men to be married, no, Peter and other apostles were married. We can find that in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 5. We do not know what caused the fever of Peter's mother-in-law, but we do know that, again, it was healed instantly with just a touch. Now, look with me at verse 16. When evening came, many who were demon-possessed were brought to him. He drove out the spirits with the word and healed all that were sick. There are two groups here. There are the demon-possessed and there are the sick. For the demon-possessed, the demons are driven out solely by his word. The authority of Jesus had power over these evil spirit beings. The sick were healed. You know, there is a very important lesson here. Once again, in the healing movement, there has been error propagated. There are those who would say that all sickness is caused by a demon. I have heard these things myself. And thus you have the demon of a sore throat, the demon of a sore ear, the demon of a headache. Oh, I've got a demon of a sore knee. And so they believe all healing is casting out demons. Yes, demons can cause sickness. But by far the overwhelming majority of sickness is a result of the nature of sin that we have, and that our bodies are then open to infection and disease. They are then susceptible to these things. And so we must not see demons on doorknobs and attribute everything to demons. I will say more about demon possession at a later time, and let me just say at this point that by overwhelming majority of Bible students and commentators do not believe that Christians can be demon possessed. The sad thing is so many people have been taught that they are demon possessed, and it's just not possible for the Holy Spirit to allow a filthy demon to possess someone that he has redeemed and filled with himself. So we shall just pass over that and deal with it in more detail at a later time. However, just to add that although Christians cannot be demon possessed, make no error, certainly the evil one and his hordes can certainly give you a lot of trouble and evil thoughts and try and stimulate evil actions and bring temptation to you. Our next section is in verses 18 to 20. So let's read that. When Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross over to the other side of the lake. Then a teacher of the law came to him and said, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." Jesus replied, "Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." So here was a man who wanted to follow Jesus. Oh, how the modern Western church would have snapped him up and taken him into some pastoral or missionary program and pushed him forward and said, yes, 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 here is the man that we can use in the service of the Lord. But Jesus is not so easily taken in. Jesus has no permanent home. And to follow him would be to share in his discomfort, difficulties, and all the other difficulties that he would face. Jesus did not want someone following him who had simply made a sudden, impulsive decision without counting the cost and would later turn back and leave the faith and bring a bad name both on Christ and Christianity. We find another such person in verses 21 and 22. Another disciple said to him, "Lord, let me first go and bury my father." But Jesus told him, "Follow me and let the dead bury the dead." This is one of those cases where we are very grateful for the Greek scholars who tell us that there is a colloquial meaning in that "let me go and bury my father." It doesn't come out in the English because we don't say things like that. But what is in that statement, "let me go and bury my father," is this. His father was still very much alive. And he was saying, I will follow you, but let me just wait until my father has died. Well, Jesus' reply is, in other words, you have to choose. You have to choose. If you're going to follow me now, not later. Or if you're going to follow me, you cannot follow the world as well. Do not be conformed to this world, nor but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, is the words of Paul to us. And so it's decision time. It's decision time which ultimately confronts each believer along the path of discipleship. Is it the world or Christ? Is it my will or Christ's will? And he will not wait. He doesn't want a disciple who will come in 5 years, 10 years' time. It is now. Behold, today is the day of salvation. We move on to our next section, which is in verses 23 to 27. Then he got into the boat with his disciples followed him. Without warning, a furious storm came up on the lake so that the waves swept over the boat. But Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him and said, "Lord, save us, we're going to drown." He replied, "You of little faith, why are you so afraid?" He got up, rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. The men were amazed and asked, "What kind of man is this? Even the winds and waves obey him." Following the interlude regarding the discipleship of these two characters that wanted to follow Jesus, Matthew returns to accounts of Jesus' power, this time over nature. Jesus and his disciples are crossing the Sea of Galilee. They are going from Capernaum in the west over to Gadara in the east. Now, the Sea of Galilee is well known for its sudden, extremely violent storms. The wind comes over from the west, just over the mountains of the west, sweeps down into the kind of valley that the Sea of Galilee lies in, and produces violent, violent storms from those western highlands blowing over to the east. And this was one of those storms, just so that we know the severity of it. Even these disciples, who were experienced fishermen on that Sea of Galilee, were terrified by this storm. The most amazing part of this is Jesus rebukes the winds, the waves, immediate calm, peace. Who is this man that has so much power over the natural elements? We move now on to our 7th section, and this concludes the chapter, and this now is in verses 28 to 34. When he arrived at the other side in the region of the in the region of the Gadarenes, 2 demon-possessed men coming from the tombs met him. They were so violent that no one could pass that way. "What do you want with us, Son of God?" they shouted. "Have you come here to torture us before the appointed time?" Some distance from them, a large herd of pigs was feeding. The demons begged Jesus, "If you drive us out, send us into the herd of pigs." He said to them, "Go." So they came out and went into the pigs, and the whole herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and died in the water. Those tending the pigs ran off and went into the town and reported all this, including what had happened to the demon-possessed men. Then the whole town went out to meet Jesus, and when they saw him, they pleaded with him to leave their region. These 2 demon-possessed men were not only violent, but we read in other places, but they had amazing supernatural strength. It was most definitely not a safe place to be. They struck fear into all who might need to pass by that area. And yet here is the curious thing. They themselves feared the presence of Jesus, or rather, the demons within them feared the presence of Jesus. And so whatever power they may have had, it was most certainly not equal to the overwhelming divine power of Jesus Christ. Both of these men had been possessed by a large number of demons. Here in Matthew's Gospel, they speak in the plural about themselves, but further on in the other Gospels, we learn that there were many of them. They were legion because of the number of demons that had possessed these 2 men. Here is something interesting. We don't know what caused this possession. Why were these men possessed? Why could they not become free from these demonic powers? So, I must tell you, there are many questions about the spirit world that surrounds us that are not necessarily easy to answer, and we should not deal with them with simplistic theology, alas, as some have done, much to their own spiritual danger. However, whatever it is, Jesus has authority over this demon horde. They now could only go when and where Jesus sent them. So, leaving aside the details of the account once again, just taking the broad view, let's just look. We first of all note that there was a complete deliverance for both men. Complete and immediate. The second thing to note was the rejection of Jesus by the people of the nearby town. One would have thought these two very dangerous, very strong men are no longer going to be a danger to the people passing by. Surely they would be pleased about that. But for whatever reason, maybe it was the loss of the pigs, which Jews shouldn't have been looking after anyway, they did not want Jesus to linger in their town or area. So sad, so sad. How often maybe have we seen people who've been blessed by the Lord, blessed by the gospel as it's touched their lives, yet because they've not apprehended it with a full, believing, heartfelt faith, but rather have just tasted and messed around with the gospel, that they no longer want Jesus. Oh yes, they got the good things, they thought, and then they've wandered off and lived their lives by themselves. Such a tragedy. Nonetheless, these two men, we learn that one of them wanted to follow Jesus. We learn from the other Gospels, one of them wanted to follow Jesus, but Jesus said to him, "No, you stay. You testify to your people about the goodness of the Lord." So these people that rejected Jesus were certainly going to have one of these men in their midst telling them about his power. So, to sum up so far, Jesus has demonstrated his power over leprous diseases, wide variety of skin diseases. He's demonstrated his power over paralysis, over fever, over nature, winds and waves, and demon possession, and, by the way, all sickness. Now, there's more to come in chapter 9, so we'll look at that in our next installment. But just in closing, there is an observation, and we must say it is just an observation because it is not confirmed or taught elsewhere in Scripture, but I'll just pass it on because I think it may be a useful idea. There are Bible commentators that, seeing the miracles of Jesus and believing, yes, they were miracles, yes, they happened as they were recorded for us, but they are also illustrative of something else. That each of these people that are healed or delivered, they illustrate to us the nature of sin. Think of this. The man with skin disease, leprosy as it's called, he is unclean, he's separated. And so it teaches us about the uncleanness and the loathsomeness of sin. Think about the man paralyzed, the servant of the Centurion, and how sin makes the sinner helpless and unable to help himself, unable to do anything about his condition until the grace of Jesus Christ is accepted into his life. Think about the demon-possessed and sick. You know, there are large varieties of sin and sins. Yet Jesus has the power and authority to deliver people from all of them. There's a long list of sins, and you could probably go through members and past members of our church and fellowships, and you could list down things, dreadful things that they've been completely delivered from, and handed over to a godly, holy life. Lastly, when we look at these two violent men, there are certain kinds of sins that lead to a kind of insanity and violence, that people are not normal when they've involved themselves in these things for year after year. And even then, Jesus has the power and authority to deliver and restore. As I said, these things are not confirmed elsewhere in Scripture, but it's just an observation that the healings of Jesus also seem to describe the healings and the deliverance of believers from past sins in their life. Well, that is where we must leave it for this week. Next week, Lord willing, we shall come back and look at the partner, the twin chapter of chapter 8, and we'll go into chapter 9 and see what that has for us. So, in the meanwhile, as we usually end off with, my prayer for you is the Lord will keep, bless, and direct each one of you. So, until next time, God bless.